first time I stepped into the Majestic Theater, it felt as though I had crossed a threshold into another realm. Dust hung heavy in the air, swirling in the faint beams of light that pierced through the tattered curtains. The building, once a grand hub of entertainment, now stood as a decaying monument to a bygone era. My name is Jack, a documentary filmmaker with a penchant for the paranormal, and I was here to uncover the truth behind the legend of the phantom of the old theater. I had heard the stories, whispers of a ghostly figure haunting the theater's darkened halls, the specter of a forgotten actor who met a tragic end on this very stage. As I made my way through the deserted lobby, the sense of foreboding grew. The old wooden floors creaked beneath my feet, and the musty scent of aged fabric and rotting wood filled my nostrils. I was not easily spooked, but something about this place unsettled me deeply. With my camera in hand, I began to document the eerie atmosphere. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the leaky ceiling. I ventured further into the bowels of the theater, each step taking me deeper into the shadows. The backstage area was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and forgotten props, all shrouded in darkness. I reached the main stage, a vast, empty space that seemed to pulsate with an unseen energy. The velvet curtains, once vibrant red, now hung in tatters. I set up my tripod and began filming, narrating the history of the theater and the legend of its spectral inhabitant. According to local lore, the phantom was the spirit of Edward Blackwood, a renowned actor who had mysteriously disappeared during a performance decades ago. Some said he had been murdered, others believed he had taken his own life, driven mad by the pressures of his craft. As I spoke, a chill ran down my spine, and I could swear I felt eyes upon me. I paused, scanning the empty seats, but saw nothing. Shaking off the sensation, I continued, determined to capture any evidence of the supernatural. Hours passed, and I grew weary, my nerves frayed by the oppressive atmosphere. It was then that I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, but undeniably real. "Jack!" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was soft, almost sorrowful, and seemed to come from the wings of the stage. I turned slowly, the beam of my flashlight cutting through that darkness. There was nothing there. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the experience. Perhaps it was just the wind or my imagination playing tricks on me. I decided to take a break and review the footage I had captured. Sitting in the front row, I connected my camera to my laptop and began to watch. At first, everything seemed normal. My narration, the empty stage, the eerie silence. But then, as I reached the point where I had heard the whisper, the screen flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadowy figure stood at the edge of the stage, barely discernible in the dim light. It was tall and thin, dressed in what appeared to be period clothing. I rewound the footage and watched again, but the figure was gone. Frustration and fear battled within me. Had I captured proof of the phantom, or was it merely a trick of the light? Determined to find out, I ventured back onto the stage, calling out to the spirit. "Edward Blackwood, if you are here, show yourself." My voice echoed through the empty theater, but there was no response. I felt foolish, standing there alone in the darkness, speaking to a ghost. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and my breath became visible in the frigid air. I shivered, clutching my flashlight as a sense of dread washed over me. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Jack, help me!" I spun around, the light revealing a pair of eyes staring back at me from the shadows. They were filled with a deep sorrow, and as I stepped closer, the figure of a man emerged. His face was gaunt, his clothes tattered and stained with blood. It was Edward Blackwood. "Help me," he repeated, his voice barely more than a whisper. I stood frozen, unable to speak. The ghost reached out a hand, and I could feel the cold radiating from his spectral form. "Free me from this place." Before I could respond, he vanished, leaving me alone on the stage. My heart raced as I tried to process what had just happened. Edward Blackwood's ghost was real, and he was trapped in this decaying theater. I knew I had to help him, but how? I spent the next several days researching, poring over old newspapers and records in the local library. I learned that Edward had been a brilliant actor, but his final performance had been marred by scandal. A fellow actor had accused him of a terrible crime, and though he had been cleared of any wrongdoing, the stain on his reputation had driven him to despair. Returning to the theater, I was determined to find a way to communicate with Edward. I brought with me an old spirit board, hoping to make contact. Sitting on the stage, I placed my hands on the planchette and began to ask questions. "Edward, can you hear me?" The planchette moved slowly, spelling out a single word. "Yes." "Why are you trapped here?" I asked, my hands trembling. "Betrayed," the board spelled out. "Must find peace." "What can I do to help you?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Forgive," the board responded. "Find the truth." I realized then that I needed to uncover the truth behind the betrayal that had led to Edward's tragic fate. Only then could I hope to free his tormented spirit. But as I delved deeper into the mystery, I uncovered secrets that were darker and more sinister than I could have imagined. My investigation led me to the descendants of those involved in the original scandal, and I discovered a web of lies and deceit that had been carefully hidden for decades. Edward had been framed, his career and life destroyed by jealousy and greed. I knew that revealing the truth would be dangerous, but I had come too far to turn back. One night, as I prepared to confront those responsible, I returned to the theater for what I hoped would be the final time. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel Edward's presence, watching and waiting. I stood on the stage, my heart pounding, ready to face whatever came next. And then the lights went out, plunging the theater into darkness. In that moment, I knew that the true horror was just beginning. The darkness was absolute. I could feel my pulse quicken as I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam flickering to life and casting long, ominous shadows across the stage. The air grew colder, and I could hear the distant echo of footsteps, soft, deliberate, and coming closer. "Edward?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, only the oppressive silence that seemed to press down on me from all sides. I could feel the weight of the theater's history bearing down on me, the accumulated anguish of years manifesting in the very walls around me. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent, until they stopped just behind me. I turned slowly, my flashlight casting a weak glow on the empty stage. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I felt a cold breath on my skin. "Jack," the whisper came again, and I knew that Edward was near. "Show yourself," I said, my voice firmer this time. "I know the truth. I know what happened to you." The temperature dropped further, and I could see my breath misting in the frigid air. Suddenly, a figure materialized before me. Edward Blackwood, his spectral form more solid than before. His eyes were filled with a desperate plea, his face etched with sorrow. "You must help me," he said, his voice a mere whisper. "I am trapped here, a prisoner of my own despair. You know the truth. Now you must reveal it." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "I will, I promise." Edward's form wavered, and he extended a hand towards me. "There is one more thing you must know," he said. "My death, it was no accident." His words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I was murdered," he replied, his voice filled with a cold, hollow rage. "By those who sought to silence me forever. You must find the proof and bring it to light. Only then can I be free." With that, Edward vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. My mind raced as I pieced together the fragments of the mystery. I knew that revealing the truth would be dangerous, but I had no choice. I had to honor my promise to Edward and bring justice to his restless spirit. The next few days were a blur of research and investigation. I combed through old records, interviewed descendants, and uncovered a web of lies that had been carefully constructed to conceal the truth. Edward had been framed for a crime he did not commit, and his murder had been orchestrated by those who feared his return to prominence would expose their deceit. Armed with this knowledge, I prepared to confront the perpetrators. The evidence I had gathered was irrefutable, and I knew that bringing it to light would finally free Edward's spirit. But as I prepared to leave for the theater one last time, a sense of unease settled over me. I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were tracking my every move. That night, as I entered the theater, the atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension. The shadows seemed to shift and dance, and the silence was heavy with anticipation. I made my way to the stage where I had arranged to meet with the key figures I had uncovered, descendants of those who had wronged Edward. As they arrived, their faces etched with apprehension, I felt a cold presence behind me. Edward was here, watching, waiting for justice. I began to lay out the evidence, detailing the conspiracy that had led to his downfall and murder. The tension in the room was electric, and I could see the guilt and fear in their eyes. "You cannot hide the truth any longer," I said, my voice strong and unwavering. "Edward Blackwood was an innocent man, framed and murdered to protect your family's secrets. It's time to set things right." Suddenly, the theater was plunged into darkness, and a bone-chilling cold swept through the room. I heard gasps and murmurs of fear as the ghostly figure of Edward Blackwood appeared before us. His eyes burned with a cold fire as he looked upon those who had wronged him. "Confess!" he commanded, his voice echoing through the darkness. "Confess and free me from this torment." One by one, they began to speak, their voices trembling as they admitted their ancestors' crimes. The weight of their guilt was almost tangible, and as they confessed, I could see Edward's form begin to shimmer and fade. The truth had been spoken, and his spirit was finally at peace. With a final, sorrowful glance, Edward Blackwood disappeared into the ether, leaving the theater bathed in a serene, almost holy light. The oppressive weight that had hung over the Majestic Theater for so long was lifted, and the air felt lighter, freer. I stood on the stage, my heart pounding with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The story of Edward Blackwood had been brought to light, and his spirit was finally at rest. As I packed up my equipment, I knew that this experience would stay with me forever, a chilling reminder of the power of truth and the enduring impact of the past. As I left the theater, I took one last look at the grand, decaying structure. The shadows seemed less menacing now, the silence less oppressive. I knew that Edward was finally free, his story told, his spirit at peace. And with that knowledge, I walked away, the echoes of the past finally laid to rest.